We now begin the session with a session by Lokesh ji Ghai and Gauri ji Raje. They are talking about crafting stories, rearticulating the world of local art, stories, and listeners. This is a contemporary application of storytelling, and I have the honor of introducing Lokesh Ji Ghai is a textile artist and a researcher working with traditional Indian craft practice. He has showcased his textile art at V&A Museum of Childhood in London, based on folk narratives. He's also been a founding faculty at Somaya Kalavidya Kutch, India's premier design institute for traditional craft communities. He's also a faculty at School of Design, UPES University, Dehradun, India. Gauriji Rajesh is a storyteller and anthropologist based in Scotland and India. She works for different genres: folk tales, fairy tales, epics, myths, mainly from non European regions, and autobiographical storytelling. She is fascinated by myths and their power to hold community memories and has been increasingly working with the ways in which stories allow migrants to create a relationship with the land that is settled in. Without much ado, over to Lokesh ji and Gauri ji. You have 15 minutes, please. Thank you.
So, very good afternoon, namaste. I would present the first part of the paper and Gauri the second. Introduction. This paper is a reflective inquiry into the agency of storytelling as a part of connection and exposure for Indian artisans with no immediate access to their audiences. The paper will discuss an ongoing project created during the first year of the coronavirus pandemic. The Initially, to facilitate this project was created for the sales of the artisans' work. Tapping into the deep synergy between art and stories, the project continues to explore stored art, the place of stories in lives of local Indian artisans, and re-articulating the stories and storytelling through digital media when live contact was not possible. The problem. The uh, first lockdown of COVID pandemic hit the artisans in India community hard. Within the artisan, most affected were those who toil at the grassroots. These, these grassroots artisans practicing their craft as a heritage are not recognized as artists and treated as laborers. These marginalized artists are often exploited by master artisans, brands, or designers. They do not receive due credit or fair monetary compensation. Added to this, COVID pandemic meant rise of anxiety, uncertainty, and loss of wages for the artisans. Usually the artisans do not have a direct access to the end consumer. In some cases, they participate in exhibitions in metro cities or depend on tourists visiting their villages. All these channels were closed. During the first lockdown, I conducted a qualitative research through telephonic interviews with 40 artisans across 4 states. The interviews revealed that many artisans were hand to mouth depending on charity, in addition feeling anxiety and hopelessness. Given these circumstances, a series of ongoing collaborative events to support and encourage the artisan were devised. For the collaborations, storyteller Gauri Raje was invited by me. Kevin Murray, editor of Garland, an Australia-based craft magazine, was enthusiastic to develop the ideas and promotion of the events through the Garland publication. Stories stored in craft objects. Indian crafts, with its rich cultural heritage, inherent stories. These stories are given tangible expression within craft objects, usually as elements of story. These elements could be in form of colors, abstract motifs, layout embedded in the process of making, a detailing in finishing, etc. For example, a weaver from Kutch, Gujarat may weave geometric abstract pattern according to their loom technique. These patterns hold sacred connotation understood by the maker and the original consumer community the craft objects were made for. What may seem simply two inverted triangles placed on each other actually denotes Lord Shiva's Damru. An embroider from Punjab may hand embroider a fulkari for her trousseau with auspicious red and yellow colors, but then add a black motif as a nazar booty to keep the evil eye away. At times, there may be a reverse relationship between a motif and a story, where a design has been crafted first and then to identify it, a story is given. For example, in Bandhani tie-dye layout may be called a bazaar for the sake of identification, and over a period of time, a story is constructed or found and becomes an association with the design pattern. Connecting artisan with audiences. Once the consumer audiences change, the untrained eye without the cultural context would not find meaning stored in the design language of the craft objects. For the artisan skill lies in telling through making, not telling as orating. Hence, a storyteller adds value by narrating to new audiences. Globalization and change in Indian village lifestyles have altered the consumer for traditional craft. It is urban audiences that are the current majority market for traditional craft. These urban audiences who consume craft are based across the world, identifying themselves as global citizens, believing in material, cultural, and environmental sustainability, virtues that handcrafts hold. However, the physical and language distance between the makers and the consumer has been a challenge. The online Zoom application emerged as an interface to connect audiences and with craft people. Having a platform where the audience could connect live and directly with the marginalized artisans was a leap. The collaboration was envisioned as a series of ticketed storytelling events with focus on one artisan for each session. The intent was to find appreciation and visibility for the artisans. The ticket sales raised financial support. Artisan products were promoted during the event. Four key partners constituted to the collaboration: me, the craft researcher, giving historical and ethnographic context; Gauri Raje, telling the stories; Garland magazine, and an artisan as a focus of each event. Raje narrated the story relating to the artisan world. This brought the spotlight to the artisan. Each event dedicated time for Q&A between the artisan and the audience, with me supporting translation. With the opportunity to be heard, the artisan felt empowered. The featured artisan. The impetus of starting the collaboration was to support marginalized artisans. The paper focuses on three artisans featured chronologically as the event evolved. Sita Banchabra, based in the old city of Ahmedabad, Sita Ben is a beadcraft artisan. A senior citizen and a vulnerable single woman, she struggles to make ends meet. The lockdown added to her challenges both financially and emotionally. She reached out to me for financial support. Through the publicity and during the storytelling event, her work was promoted. As a result, most of her work sold out, bringing additional income beside ticket sales. Ashwin by Siju. Based in Bujodi village in Kutch, Ashwin Bhai is a younger handloom weaver. He has won an award as an emerging weaver for his design innovation during his education at Somaya Kala Vidya. However, due to hardship of the lockdown, Ashwin stopped weaving and started working as a menial labor digging sand at a factory. Ashwin was encouraged to return to weaving with storytelling event as a platform where he could sell his new designs. Ashwin wove new collection thinking of global audiences. The event gave him confidence to continue weaving new ideas and establish a professional Instagram account to register market visibility. Anuradha Devi. Based in Chamba, Himachal Pradesh, Anuradha Devi is a handicraft artisan who coils pine needle to make containers. A single mother, Anuradha Devi primarily depends on tourists and small exhibitions to sell her craft for livelihood. In absence of no sales of her goods, she exhausted all her saving during the lockdown. The event promoted containers made by her. Anuradha Devi felt empowered sharing her stories directly with the audience. She was a source of encouragement and inspiration. I now invite my colleague Gauri to take it from here.
Thank you, Lokesh. I'll be focusing in this paper on, in my presentation, on the relationship between the storyteller and the artisan. So the title of the paper, we start with the word re-articulation. So I'd just like to clarify what I mean by that term. Re-articulation is not about contemporizing stories, but opening a space that gives the outside world a glimpse into the storied world of the artisan and serves the artisan and their creative practice. It means it necessitates a fine relationship between research, translation of story, permissions from the artisan and their community, and necessarily we have to engage with the ethics of storytelling. And it is these aspects that I'm going to elaborate on now. So the first one is the process of selecting the stories with each artisan. The stories selected for each event are the end point of a conversation with each artisan and the craft researcher over a month or much longer. The conversation is about establishing a relationship with the artisan with a view to understanding their world and art form, their struggles and inspirations, their sense of self, their communities and histories, and finally, the place of their art and its meaning. Through these conversations, themes of stories and at times stories themselves emerge. Stories that have a personal meaning and inspiration for the artisan require consent to tell from the artisan themselves. In some situations, the artisan's life is so steeped in the story that we request the artisan to tell the story in their own language. And then I, as a storyteller, work as a translator. We create a woven telling. The case in point would have been Anuradha Ji's session. At other times, while the artisan may grant us permission to tell a story at an event, consent is still required from the wider community and storytellers within that community to tell the story at the event in English. This was the case in point with the younger weaver, Ashwin Bhai. In the final situation, consent is also required from the artisan to highlight certain aspects of their story by telling a particular story which may not be from their traditional cultural background. And this was certainly the case with Sita Ben. Story thus works as a window into the world of the artist, and the storyteller is literally serving the artist and their story. The stories chosen so far have been on the basis of motifs in the art, symbolism and heritage of the artistic tradition, the life and struggles of the artist, the sense of the artist, what is the sense that the artist is giving out, and the community context which holds the artist and their creative life. In terms of the presentation of stories for each event, the historical and the ethnographic context is narrated by Lokesh, and then I, as the storyteller, weave in two or three different stories with the historical and ethnographic presentation. So it's again a woven kind of presentation all through. The main language of telling is English, peppered with Hindi, Gujarati, Marathi, depending on the language of the artisan that we are working with. At times, it is a storytelling. I'm telling a story like you see in the picture here. Or at times, the storytelling is juxtaposed with a visual presentation of the artist's work, especially when it involves paintings or we are focusing on motifs, where there is something about listening to a story and deeply engaging with the visuality of that particular piece and not moving visual pieces. So in terms of then re-articulating the relationship between the worlds of stories and art, what is it that we're talking about? That's my last point for this presentation. The synergy between art and stories is not an unfamiliar relationship, either on the Indian subcontinent or in many other parts of the world in their storytelling traditions. On the Indian subcontinent in particular, I refer you to the tradition of fard painting, where the artwork holds and supports the story, to traditions, other traditions, where motifs from stories find their way into motifs and artwork. And this synergy is an ongoing and open to revision based on how each artisan over generations builds a relationship with their art. Therefore, each of our event is also mindful of the telling of the story of this fluctuating synergy between the artisan and their art. For some, like Anuradha Ji, their life moves in and out of local folklore, at times mirroring the local folklore, at times changing it, or at times being inspired by it. For younger artists like Ashwin, the stories are a reminder of the legacies of their community in continuing the art of weaving. For others, like Sita Ben, the motifs and the symbols in their art emerge from a lifetime of learning, borrowing from traditions and stories in the mixed neighborhoods that they live with, and being inspired by the everyday objects they live with, like fragments coming together through their art. For Sita Ben, living her life becomes the story from which she creates her art. As a storyteller, I have to recognize this shifting ground of indigeneity. For here, I'm indicating to the idea that indigeneity springs not from an abstract notion of cultural practices or texts, but the interaction between the lived experience of the individual, of a community, and of history and relationship to heritage. To that extent, the indigeneity of art traditions is rooted not only in the repeated use of storied motifs and symbols, but also in the tradition that honors the reinterpretation of these motifs and symbols, either in their art or in living a life that informs their art. Rearticulating stories as a storyteller is about understanding where the contours of the story are located. Just because an artisan comes from a particular community tradition, it may not be where the story that informs their art or their story is located. In rearticulating stories in the context of Zoom, which is the platform that we use on virtual media, we've had to relook at the aspects of storytelling and are working on maintaining the tenuous spirit of storytelling and art. Storytelling in this context and in the context of our event is in service to the artisan and their local art. The telling, therefore, does not need to override the voice of art. Most tellings are without the use of the whole body. The use of voice and eyes predominates. There is a use of rhythms and sound rather than elaborate musicalization. The base language is English, with the use of phrases and words that are difficult to translate into English without losing their essence. The emphasis is on creating vivid images in the story through the use of language and sound that evoke the story in the minds of the listeners. The story is only one part in creating the world of the artisan and their art. The historical and ethnographic context and the artwork itself are the other two components. All the three elements, the story, the informational context, and the artwork, are in the service of the final and most important segment of the event, which is the Q&A with the artisans, as Lokesh described earlier in this paper. To this extent, we do not record any of the events, and the stories gathered from the artisan and their community are not retold in any other context by me. Telling a story given by the artisan and or their community does not make it part of my repertoire. It is to this extent that the globalized context that Zoom allows is only a space to glimpse the world of the artisan and nourish the artisan, rather than open up their creative world for consumption or appropriation. Telling the stories in English allows access to exchange ideas with audiences around the world, and we are wary of creating a space that allows either appropriation or exoticization of these stories. It will be fairly evident by now that stories create a link through images between the artisans and the audiences, who are both from different cultural and linguistic contexts. Detailing within the story remains vital, Even though the story is told in English, as a storyteller, I research the details of the story to the extent that I'm aware of the kinds of trees that are found in the area where the stories come from. In the lead up to the event, Lokesh travels to the locality of the artisan, photographing and making videos of the place and the ambience, along with the everyday life of the artisan and their community. He shares them with me and we recreate these details together. Alongside, it is also important to sense where an element would lose its nuanced meaning in a globalized context, and therefore analogies need to be found. I then take the reworked story back to the artisan, and with Lokesh, we retranslate it with modifications to the artisan and at times to the kin group. This is then further discussed, modified, or approved by the artisan and their community. It is then ready to be told as a public event. Simultaneously, Lokesh and I also have discussions with the event organizers who are based in Australia to get a sense of what in the story might have a potential of losing its meaning or becoming exoticized. Based on these discussions and conversations, the choice of stories and the form in which the story is eventually told is arrived at. The re-articulation or the telling of the story at the event is just one moment in a series of ongoing conversations and discussions. The Q&A with the artisan then is a place where the artisan is not only an expert in their art form, but they can continue the conversation that the story introduces. I will conclude by speaking a little bit about the impact of the project on the individual artisans that we've hosted at the events. Firstly, as Lokesh outlined, the impact was definitely financial, but a more significant impact was felt in terms of their ability to express their ideas to an audience who were also curious about their artistic processes and inspirations. The artisans could sense the excitement around their art for themselves and contextualize their work in the global work of art. To be asked questions about the future of their work gave them an opening to articulate their desires for the heritage of their art and not just focus on the monetary value of what they produced. Old musings that I'm sure each one of us who are artists are aware of, musings that we carry with us as we work with our art, these old musings then began to become new stories that were then released into the world. And I'm going to end my presentation there. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Lokesh ji and Gauri ji. I think we just witnessed the formation of a new tradition, bringing the essence of storytelling of the civilization into a new context, and how an entire community creates a new set of practices around that in new context. That was beautiful. And any questions? I saw in the Q&A, there was nothing, but if the audience would like to ask a couple of questions, we can take one or two questions.
As a person coming from Gauriji's field, cultural anthropology, I would like to congratulate her for creating this uh, study come activism genre. Uh, this is actually there are activist anthropologists and there are non-activist anthropologists, pure academic anthropologists, and taking your ethnography back to the cultural group has been a cultural relativist practice from decades for the validity of ethnographic research. And ethnography as narrative, narrative ethnography, ethnography as poetry, have been slogans, have been phrases, pet phrases of ethnographers. And Gauri ji is doing all this. It is narrative ethnography, it is ethnography as poetry, but ultimately it is activism at a crisis time, at a world crisis time. So putting all these ethnographic schools into a contemporary activist philanthropic practice, altruist practice, is an amazing uh, mixing of approaches of anthropology, cultural anthropology. Congratulations to you, Gauriji, for this.
Thank you so much. I would just like to say actually that this project has been founded and initiated by Lokesh, who is the craft artist researcher ongoing with his work in India, whereas, I kind of act as the link. But it would not have been possible without Lokesh. So
yeah, definitely. And Lokesh ji, with whom I would like to share that Professor Vinod Vidvans, my best friend from National Institute of Design, introduced me to the design field, and I have been teaching in various design colleges, including DJ Academy of Design, and have been associated with craft design researchers like Padmini Balramji and others, Professor Balram ji and others. So with all that, actually I'm getting all these connections when you're talking, and my research into storytelling traditions from my own region, where scroll narratives, which are called patam kathas. Patams are scrolls that are used for narration. And there is a Mandachu narration tradition in Telugu where dolls are used. Dolls are used for illustration. Scrolls are used for illustration. And there are toy and doll making communities like Itikopaka and Nirmal, toy and doll making communities, how they are very closely associated with this caste mythology. They are called Kula Puranam, Jati Puranas. And these are patronized. There is a subcaste, performing subcaste that performs the caste origin mythology to the patron caste. Patron caste patronizes that because it is its own caste origin mythology. And these subcasts, performing subcasts, they are helped by this craft community called Cherial painting community, Cherial doll making community, Cherial toy making community. And the Etikopaka, Nirmal, and others, they circulate this into their toys and dolls and the other crafts that they make. So immersed in this whole work for the last 3.5 decades, it was all bells ringing all the time. Oh God, somebody else is also doing this. But particularly exciting was the activist aspect of it. Basically, at a crisis time, when the artist is facing such a huge crisis. Okay, so Lokesh ji, that was craft part, craft design part, in which actually we now are very happy that the Cherial group is now popular all over India, and they are eking out their livelihood comfortably now. By the time we were approaching them, they were struggling. Their own family members were not taking up their profession because they were that was losing patronage. But now the situation has changed. Our activism from some other groups has helped them come out of the doom. Now they are very happy. We are also happy about our activist anthropology, if I would like to call it. Uh, so this mixing of activism and study is very good, excellent, and excited. Thank you very much. Congratulations.
Thank you.